we've got one of these games for every grade level, and there is a website which is about 2/3 developed already that has them all on it. That shows how these things relate to each other. Uh, Fifth grade is sitting in here with a game about a colonial fort. Third graders, if they are doing Giants, have already played a similar game, but with a much simpler map. Grade appropriate for third grade, about where do the indigenous people put their summer village. And then the fourth graders put a trading post in here. And then it builds on up. This is not a content activity per se, but there is a surprising amount of content in it. What it is a diagnostic activity. It's an activity that you can use to figure out a little bit about the prior knowledge of your kids, whether they even understand what a geographic perspective is, and especially what kind of map skills do they have, because it introduces through a whole series of steps a lot of these different map skills. When this is all finished, out on my social studies, these are called the location simulations. When this is finished, there's going to be a simple map at every grade level. There's going to be a somewhat more complicated map. There's going to be a presentation, an online game, and we're hoping eventually to have a YouTube video so that you've got a whole lot of flexibility as to what you pull off of this. Now, you don't need to go to this website. And in fact, I sort of recommend that you don't go to this website right now, because two of the bugs that it has are pretty serious. One bug is that if you've got a PC, it's a really convoluted process to try to download the presentation from here. But as Dave just showed you, the presentation is in the Giants right-hand column. All that this website does is show that this game is part of a graded series of these games. So with that, I'm going to climb out of that and start what the game actually looks like. The game is a simple question. Where do we put something? And how do we get the information that we want to use in order to decide where to put it? And like I say, the job is not to teach the students how to make this decision. The job is to play the game so that you can listen to them to see how they're thinking about where do we put something. And it applies to anything, like where do we put the new Ford battery plant that the people of Marshall are arguing about right now. In other words, this is a citizenship skill, and it makes sense to present it like that to your administrators if they question, what do we do in social studies that's practical? We might be talking about a fort in the 1800s, but we're developing a skill that applies to something that happens literally every day right now. So how do we make a decision like this? It's a real place. In fact, every one of the places that is chosen for this map are going to be important later on. So you're actually giving them a little prior knowledge for a later on activity in units 2, 3, and 4. You can try to figure out where it is, but we're going to keep it secret right now in order to focus on a bit more important question. How do you decide where to build your town at a particular time in history? In other words, the goal is to think about how you're making a decision, not just what decision you're making. And at that point, it's kind of a shame that we're on Zoom right now. I can see a few of your faces on your cameras, so you might be able to hold up just what you're voting for. But when you're running it in class, you want them to vote, and then you want them to give a reason. In fact, that meets one of your ELA requirements about oral presentation of data, things like that. So here's our area of interest. the map maker followed a very general rule, make the land green and the water blue, even though we know that all water isn't blue and all land isn't green. That's a cartographic convention. It's about 20 times as big as Michigan. In other words, it's a pretty big piece of real estate. You're looking for a place to start a city sometime after Columbus landed. You don't have a cell phone. You might even stop here right now and say, what else don't you have? Talk a little bit about the position in history. And you're coming from this direction. You're coming from the bottom and going into the map. Your scouts, who came out here a couple years earlier, have suggested 6 different locations for a city. And you could talk a little bit about, what do they look like? People have already tried to start a town here. And then they turned out that the swamp that they were surrounded, that they thought was going to be so useful to protect them against enemies, turns out to be a real problem when you try to grow some food. And that colony died out. So with that little bit of background knowledge, what place would you vote for? And what reason do you have? And if you happen to be there and you want to just hold up your fingers like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I know you don't have 6 fingers, so let's make a fist number 6. I have 1 vote for 4. Anybody going to give me a vote for another 4? Anybody? Asking you to vote exposes a very basic problem with democracy. And here we're going to open up the civics question that's going to come back time and time again as we go through 5th grade civics and history. What's the big advantage of a democracy? And again, you could go interactive with the student and ask them, what do you think? Is the advantage that everybody gets to vote? I personally think that the only advantage of a democracy is that people can't blame anybody else when they get their way. Other than that, it tends to be inefficient, it tends to be time-consuming, it tends to be busy, it tends to be confusing. But you can't blame anybody else when you get what you vote for. And the disadvantage, of course, is that it takes a lot of time and effort to get the knowledge that you need. So, like I say, you can make a civics lesson out of that. Or you can go right back to the geography. What else would you like to know before you make your decision? And here is where you're going to find out about prior knowledge of the students, that what kinds of things are important in order to understand where people put something. So don't skimp on this step here. Spend some time asking them, what do you need to know? In fact, you could even make a writing activity out of this. You could stop this lesson right now, make a writing activity or a homework activity out of it, and start it over again tomorrow, after they've written down what they need to know, would like to know. In the meantime, before we look at a bunch more maps, maybe we should make sure that we know what the word location means. To the geographer, the idea of location has 2 different parts. The first part of it is what's right there at that place. What are the conditions that are there? Is it cold or is it hot? Are there trees there? Are there grass, whatever? What's the language? So on. And then again, you could stop for a little while and say, I've flashed up 7 things here. Name me another condition that did not flash up on the screen. And here again, you're going to find out about your kids' prior knowledge by what else they think might be a part of the condition of the place. And it could be the slope of the land, or it could be whether you've got good drinking water. It could be Well, the problem is some of them are going to be real blurry here because there's another part. That is the connections with other places. And what the neuroscientists have told us is the brain actually processes these two ideas in two very different places. You know, what's at that location and how's it connected with other places. And the fact that the brain processes it in different places means it leads to individual differences with your students. There are going to be some people that are more concerned about the conditions right there, the weather, the language, the soil, the crops. And other people are going to be more concerned about connections. Can you trade? Are there enemies nearby? Things like that. Is there a road that connects you? Is it upstream or downstream from something else? Close to town? Does it have a canal? You know. Now, when you've gotten this far, you have heard from the students that are willing to make a volunteer out of it. So what we did was we built a quiz in right here. And it gives me a chance to tell you something about our PowerPoints. They're all too long. In other words, we know something about your computer keyboard. It has a delete key, but it does not have a create key. And because it's got a delete key, you can go through the PowerPoint and you can freely take out this section if you don't want to have the previous thing where you're flashing up the different names of these. You just want to go straight to a quiz, go ahead. If you think your kids understand it without this quiz, take the quiz out. In other words, you're free to edit these PowerPoints. But what we found, and I've probably run a game like this, I don't know, 200 times at every grade level up to graduate school. What we found is that it helps to have a quiz here that's an oral quiz. People are raising their hands so that you can just get an idea of whether they've got it. So if I say rocky soil, is that a condition or a connection? And then it'll tell you, okay, it's a condition. East of town, is that a condition or a connection? How about being upstream from the dam? Or worse yet, if you're in Midland, downstream from the dam. Okay, we've talked a little bit about conditions and connections. Does that make you want to change your vote? And you want to take a look at whether and some of your kids are changing their mind here. So that said, let's add a couple facts. Here are two enemy forts. Now, based on that new information, do you change your mind or you're going to stay with the same vote? How about if we add rivers to the map? What looks good now? And so on. It basically says, here's where the mountains are. Does that change your vote? Here's where some good cropland is. Does that change your vote? Once again, here's something that you may or may not want to use, but we put it in there because it's easier for you to delete it than it is for you to make it if you decide you need it. We found running this in a lot of classrooms, particularly at grade 4 and 5, that it's helpful to stop here and say, let's do a straight up comparison. Compare the conditions at place 3 and 5. Which one has better conditions for making a town, making a living there? And what do you think? Hold up, 3, 5. That was a quick change. Why'd you go against number 5? It turns out that this was indeed a problem in early American history, that these areas here, where the cropland was not nearby, couldn't grow beyond a certain size because they just weren't able to get enough food to support the population. How about comparing the connections of 4 and 2? And again, this is going to turn out to be important in the American history. That place 4 is on a river that goes through the mountains. Place 2 is on a river that starts in the mountains. And that connection turns out to be important. As we said, this is a real place. Do you know where it is? And then this says, turns the map sideways. It said, if you look at the map sideways like that, it shows Eastern North America. Place X, the one that didn't do so well, was Jamestown. And it goes on through, explains a little bit about each one of these places. So if you want to talk about Boston in some length here and why it was important in early history at Charleston, the PowerPoint has got some of that information on it. But the point is simple. If students look at history as the result of decisions that people made at that particular time and place, it engages a whole lot more of their brain power, and it makes all those locations much easier to remember. It's easier to remember why New York grew faster than Charleston, because New York's river went through the mountains. Charleston's river did not. Now, the river had to be helped out by the Erie Canal, but the fact is the Erie Canal was really easy to build compared to trying to build one west from Charleston through the mountains. So the location of just about every city that we're likely to encounter anywhere in the early history, and not just the cities, but also the battles that occurred. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into lesson 2, because the logic that the different European colonial powers used in choosing where to locate their towns almost inevitably led to conflict. We call it the French and Indian War, but it was actually part of a French-British war that was global at the time. It was one of the very first world wars. So at the end, it's got a copyright notice that gives you explicit permission to edit it, to modify it, to do anything like that. The only thing that you're not allowed to do is to put it up on the web as if you wrote it. Other than that, that's what a PowerPoint looks like. And that's what the purpose of this first session was, is to say, we created that game to solve 3 problems. One of them is to help you tell kids, hey kids, social studies can be fun. Second thing is to do a little bit of diagnosis of their prior knowledge. And the third thing is to see what kind of map skills they have. Also mention that you can do spin-offs into economics and civics based on this game here. In other words, well, actually, send me an email when you've tried it out and tell me what you did different that you thought worked pretty well or didn't work pretty well. Because most of what I've been telling you so far has been based upon the experience of teachers that have tried this out in different games like that. So with that, I think if I click that one more time, that goes away. And I should be able to find a stop share somewhere. Dave, are you around?
I am around.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Yeah, let me go this far and then say, any questions at all about how you might deploy this game? Or maybe you've already done it in your class and you can tell us how yours worked.
I was actually going to say, I know that Mary Sue just did this because I was just meeting with her the other day, and she had it up on the board. So, Mary Sue, do you want to give the unbiased, unabashed Yelp review on this?
Certainly. Sorry, that was my phone going off. Yeah, we thought it was great. I saw it in a training a couple years back when we had a Giants training through the ISD. It was one of our professional development days. And I had never had the opportunity to use it because I wasn't social studies fifth grade. But last year was the first year that I actually got to do it, and the kids really enjoyed it. And today we actually finished that, and the whys were very enjoyable for me to hear. And then they would talk back and forth and kind of debate about, well, why maybe the mountains will protect you if you are in this location, and the bay would protect you from the wind, from the water. And they brought up a lot of great points all by themselves. So that was it was enjoyable. I really enjoyed that lesson.
Thank you for that. All right. So, and has anyone else dug into the units before and done these that wanted to share something real quick? Okay. The perk of this being a second version of the rollout is that we've updated the units a little bit, but you know, some of you are familiar with them in their form. So if we ever come across an activity that you've done, feel free to jump in and give your Yelp review of it. So we are almost at our quick break here coming up, but before we do, I wanted to share two things. The first thing I'm going to share is you'll notice down here, bonus location simulation landing page. That link will take you to the thing that Phil referenced at the start. And it also includes in this far column what we call, for lack of a better term, online game. It's not a game per se, but it is, but it isn't, but it is. But if you click on this, it is actually a student version of the same PowerPoint, and it follows along. And what's really kind of cool is that as you go through, kids will make their choice on the map. They will actually click on the map on one of those locations. Oh, and I had a lot of fun developing the animation of the ship going across the sea there with the waves. So if your kids get stuck on that, like the hypnotizing waves moving back and forth, you're welcome. But as we go through, you know, here's the map of where we're going. And here are different locations. I clicked on the wrong one here, but you know, it saves the location for each student. So as they click on these, the next time it comes to a choice, as more information is layered onto the map, it will actually spit back and say, last time you chose choice A, where would you like to go now? So I bring this up because this is there. The big thing to remember, though, it is not saving things like anywhere where you can come back to it 5 days later. So if you do the online version with students, if you do that online version with students, have them keep their Chromebooks open, that web tab open for a couple until you finish it. Otherwise, it will not actually remember where they go. I have learned over the years to program the things that Phil can dream up, but even I have my limits on what my brain can hold at this moment, and complex JavaScript coding is not there for me yet. But I have 9 more bloodborne pathogen videos until I'm eligible to retire. So who knows? Maybe that'll be a second career for me after I'm done. But regardless, these are all here, and you can feel free to have students follow along with you. We don't recommend pushing this out to students as a do it on their own. We want them following along with you because we don't want them to miss any of that important information. And as Phil already mentioned, the power is in those discussions, and the power's in the why do we do this, or why did you choose this location, and why did you change your location? So those conversations you miss if you just push this out as an activity for kids to do on their own. But if you want them following along, the online version is really cool.
Yeah, and while he's got that up on the screen, oops, The one that he showed you as a sample is an alternative possibility that could go in either 5th or 6th grade. And it's one that's much more focused. It's on just Jamestown and the immediate area around Jamestown. And we suggest that you could do the one that is all of Eastern North America as your teaser at the beginning, and then come back maybe in February when things start to slow down. You know, it's cold outside, kids are yawning, they're tired. You might want to come back with the Jamestown game as a way to kind of perk things up and to review what you've done so far. So we need to figure out how to make these links possible within it. So you might see a revision in the Giants outline a little bit to accommodate that. That's a way for us to say it pays to look at the Giants outline with fresh eyes because it is being revised more or less every couple months, depending on what kind of feedback we get from teachers.